Welcome to the Smart Society Show, your go-to place for climate news, leaders, and interviews with founders and CEOs of rapidly growing tech companies. Each week, we kick off the show with our What's News segment, looking at climate, tech, and financial markets. So this week, obviously, the big news comes from last week, which was the New York Climate Week. And Chris, I know you were there in attendance. So maybe let's start off with what was happening in the ground in New York Climate Week.
Well, yeah, thanks, Bryn. It was a busy time. I had a great opportunity to attend a number of roundtable events with some key climate leaders. Simon Steele, the Executive Secretary of the UNCCC, the UN's official body on climate change, attended an event, a roundtable breakfast with myself and a number of high-level companies like Microsoft, Unilever, Google, to sort of talk about how to ensure that the private sector can have greater involvement going forwards with a number of points around decarbonisation. I think a lot of the talk at New York Climate Week was around the national determined contributions that countries are going to have to submit in February of next year. That was the topic of another conversation I attended with Catherine McKenna as part of the Climate Action Coalition that I chair. Catherine was Canada's Canadian climate minister. Hopefully we'll get her on the podcast one day. Again, she wrote the Integrity Matters report for the UN Director General, and she was focusing on the role of private companies to deliver into these NDCs. So I sort of got this sort of theme that was coming out in New York. Obviously, it's now about delivery. It's about implementation. It's not about what you will do. It's about what you're doing now. And with that, how can the private sector, how can corporates help actually supply countries with their ambitions for these national determined contributions that are going to be agreed at COP30 in Brazil. That was honestly the sort of constant theme of every discussion I attended. Was, how can companies play a role in actually facilitating and catalyzing that level of ambition that obviously will set the sort of decarbonisation emissions reduction targets to 2035. One really interesting announcement that came out of New York Climate Week actually was that the UK formally announced their new special representative on climate. And that's Rachel Kite. And obviously we had Rachel as our first climate leaders interviewee on the last podcast. So we got the exclusive of having the opportunity to speak to Rachel. But I think that was also demonstrated to me that the UK is back in business when it comes to climate action. Rachel was, we honestly, we didn't know that Rachel was going to be appointed envoy. We had no tip off. But she's a fantastic choice, really experienced, was a participant and helped put together the Paris Agreement, really sort of drove activity from the World Bank when she was vice president there. So I couldn't be more delighted for Rachel, but also more delighted for the UK in seeing someone of her experience and caliber coming back to the fore.
Yeah, and going into COP in November, it's not very far away. So hopefully the UK will be able to play a real leading role, especially around Article 6 and carbon markets negotiations.
Yeah, and I think the UK has been steamrollering these announcements ever since the Labour government came back into power. And one of the announcements related to carbon markets was the fact that they're going to commit £22 billion to carbon capture, storage, and utilisation. And lots of people got in contact with me, text me saying, "What do you think about this?" Now,
I think I was one of them.
Do. That's true. Yeah. Well, I saw this announcement it took it with a bit of a pinch of sort of zero carbon salt, because it's actually a re-announcement of sorts. The last Conservative government announced £20 billion over 20 years for their industrial cluster program. Now that's like HyNet in the northwest, it's Net Zero Teesside in the northeast, and these are ports like Port Ellesmere in Cheshire that have the ability to store CO2 under the sea in old salt mines and caverns, and could be a fantastic opportunity. The UK has the largest natural storage opportunity for CO2 in the whole of the northern hemisphere. But actually, when you look at the new announcement, it's 22 billion pounds over 25 years. So long-term certainty, fantastic, but actually real terms cut in the amount of money that was promised by government for CCUS. What it does mean is that the clusters have the certainty to progress. I know a lot of them were very worried, with the change of government, was this going to be sort of, committed to? So that's great news. The other thing that no one really picked up, it wasn't in the press release, was that the government had originally intended to have a capture target of 10 megatons of CO2 by 2030, leading to at least sort of 20 to 30 megatons by 2035 and beyond. Now, this has been cut back. It's actually now 8.5 megatons of CO2 has been announced by 2030. So we've lost a bit. That's going to make it more difficult for the UK to hit its climate targets. But also, when you look at the price of carbon, this is 22 billion pounds supplied by the government. There's an additional 8 billion pounds worth of capital going in from the private sector. So that's 30 billion for the projects. If you look at that relatively to the 8.5 megatons of CO2 captured, roughly works out like a carbon price of £140 ton of CO2 captured. So that's a lot more expensive than what the US is targeting for 2030 for the $100 mark of CO2, which does sort of reflect on where are we going with the carbon price. You mentioned Article 6, we'll see what happens there, but we're going to need to have a level playing field internationally if we're going to have carbon trading, if we're going to really sort of internationalize decarbonization opportunities through carbon capture. So I thought that, while this announcement, you could sort of say, well, it's just sort of, a bit of a rehash. It does provide some strategic questions that need answering around where are we going? Where are we going in the UK, but where are we going in relation to international policy also?
And I think another question it brings up is, you mentioned pricing, but at what price does carbon capture work independent of government subsidies? Generally, I think in private markets, this drive toward the $100 carbon capture price is what we hear of and what we look at in the potential investments that we've taken a look at. We haven't done anything yet in this space because they tend to be quite CapEx heavy. And again, I think there is a question on where we are on the adoption curve and what's the appropriate sorts of capital as we go along that adoption curve between infrastructure funds, venture capital funds, government participation and or subsidies. And it's always a hot topic when I go to venture capital climate tech events, is this discussion of, should venture capital investors or be investing into technologies that basically require government participation to make the economics work, or should they be investing into the things that today do not require that and letting that adoption curve move forward under sort of the umbrella of the government support? Many people have very, very strong views on one side or the other, but it's an interesting one to ponder for sure. Well, Chris, the other big thing I think that, again, continuing on the, oops, sorry, I think I cut you off there for a second. I was just transitioning a little bit, saying that the other big thing is also big news from the UK, that the UK closed their last coal-fired power plant. I was doing my run on the treadmill yesterday and listening to this news on The Economist, and I learned that the UK's first coal-fired power plant was actually built in 1886 by Thomas Edison. So we've come a long way. Yeah,
I know it really was a historic moment. I tweeted about it. Interestingly, got a lot of pushback from sort of climate deniers and skeptics who are out there on Twitter. The sort of who obviously sort of cling to the status quo and sort of obviously worry about energy security. But the reality is coal for the last sort of year or so has been virtually nothing, negligible amount of baseload power to the UK's power supply. When I was energy minister in 2019, I remember celebrating on Twitter that we'd done 2 weeks without coal. I was counting down. But people said, you'll always need coal in some forms. It's amazing how fast this has moved. And I really do feel it's another example of where the UK, even if we make up 1% of global emissions, can show the pathway to decarbonisation. And this is just another step towards that net zero grid that the government's going to be working towards 2030. Obviously, the challenge will be around baseload, and people want to reassurance that the lights will stay on. That's going to be critical around looking at innovation of new technologies on two fronts. One is around storage, making sure we've got battery storage, grid storage, in a way that is able to maintain a constant supply of electricity. And the other is nuclear. And I know obviously we'll be focusing a bit on nuclear for this podcast, but a lot of interest cross-party around nuclear being a baseload in the longer term.
Yeah, I think the interest in nuclear all around the world is accelerating pretty dramatically. I was reading, you were on the ground, but I was reading from afar that there was a lot of conversation also at New York Climate Week about nuclear, particularly with respect to the energy demand for AI and the hyperscalers' need for energy and signing some of those deals. So I know we talked a little bit about that last week, so we probably don't need to rehash that. But I feel like every time I open up the newspaper or talk to someone in any government, the topic of nuclear comes up. Same thing with all of our LPs. What's your view on nuclear is what I hear all the time. So we are going to have a great guest today in our Chasing Unicorns segment, who is leading a very exciting nuclear energy and nuclear waste destruction company called Transmutex. So we'll maybe pause there and keep listening if you want to learn more about nuclear. That is probably a good place to stop our What's News segment. I think we touched on the news, and we will now be moving on to our climate leaders interview. Today we have Anton Kotov from ABB joining us. Anton leads corporate strategy, M&A, venture investments, a variety of other things for ABB, previously led ABB electrification. So I know topics of energy and net zero grids will be top of mind. So stay tuned and we will transition to Anton. Welcome to the Climate Leaders section of the Smart Society Show. We are pleased to have Anton Kotov joining us today. Anton leads corporate strategy and M&A for ABB. And previously to being appointed in that role, Anton led the electrification area for ABB. So lots to talk about today as we look at the energy transition and climate technologies. Anton, I know you have great knowledge and have led a lot of transactions in this space. So we're really looking forward to the conversation today. But before we dive into a little bit more about the climate tech landscape, we always like to start with a little bit about you. That's the fun part often for our listeners. So you've had a really dynamic career at ABB, starting in business development and electrification, and then now leading corporate strategy and M&A. Can you talk us through this journey a little bit and maybe some of the moments that have shaped your career as well?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Bryn. Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks for having me today. Really a pleasure to be on the podcast. For sure, a quick story of myself. Started in the industry in 2007 when I joined Schneider Electric back in Paris, and back then that's how I got on the industry and the sector. There was an exciting 10 years with the company, working on the business and the low voltage business development and corporate strategy, and then supporting sales organization and the global account management on the strategy and business development. But in ABB, it started 7 years ago, in 2017, when I joined the electrification business area as a head of strategy and business development. But what I'd say define me as the professional within this role is the components of this role that were added throughout my tenure at ABB. So it all started with the classic business development and strategy task. Then through the decentralization, the digital piece was added. So I had the pleasure to lead the digital organization of electrification for a few years. Then I got decentralized even further. Then the sustainability topic appeared, and then I was looking after sustainability for the electrification. In the meantime, ventures got further decentralized, and in the business areas, we started looking after venture investments, which was another highlight of the job, and then M&A, obviously. So, I mean, the addition of all these components and the combination of digital sustainability, ventures, and M&A, that what shaped my role. And for sure, moving to the corporate strategy, it's pretty much the same mix of the same cocktail of topics, but more again looking after the strategy, not at the business level, more at the group level, and how we create value for our shareholders, for ABB as the group.
So, Anton, I think it's undeniable that ABB has been a real leader in decarbonization efforts. I was wondering, can you share a bit of the strategic vision behind these efforts, and how recent acquisitions like ASKI Energy or ABB Ventures investments like Brainbox AI, Protexo accelerate your progress?
Sure, absolutely. It all starts with the strategy and our purpose. The purpose of everything we do in ABB is to deliver electrification and automation solutions for our customers to achieve sustainability and resource efficiency. So everything that we do boils down to this value proposition. But of course, how we do it exactly as you mentioned, Chris, it's not just doing the organic growth and investing in technology and research and development. We're trying to always to break the non-invented here syndrome, because we in our industry, in our mission, we cannot do everything alone ourselves. So we definitely would like to benefit from the speed and the agility of the startups. And of course, we invest in those, and also we acquire smaller companies. So happy to tell a bit about the ones you've mentioned. So ASKI Energy, that's the Austrian company that is relatively small in size, but super interesting in terms of value. We acquired a couple of years ago. It's about both hardware and software solutions to analyze, optimize, and control energy usage, from advanced switching, control, regulation strategies to address your consumption and load profiles. So that really helped ABB to further improve the energy management roadmap. And also really to speed up the time to market, which we really needed. So this acquisition nicely complemented what we've been doing already in the energy management space. Then, of course, it's not only about acquisitions, and on acquisitions I can talk forever, but I think today we wanted to touch a little bit more about the startup investments that we are actually doing quite actively these days. We invested in a few companies that really contribute directly to the sustainability and decarbonization. You mentioned some of them, such as Brainbox AI. They are an autonomous HVAC optimization and control. This technology allows optimization strategies and autonomously sending commands to the individual pieces of heating, ventilation, air conditioning to reduce the emissions. And again, really, really nicely complements our portfolio, and we can do many things together with them. Protexo comes from a different angle. I mean, they're in edge-to-cloud computing, bringing the benefits of the cloud computing to the edge. And together we developed an advanced fault cause analysis for complex power systems that conducts this root cause analysis for faults in the substations based on the historic data. We also got a couple of companies here in Europe that we invested. Some of them are like in the decarbonization and in the green tech space, such as Talarna. Together we deliver a scalable platform to aggregate and correlate analysis to benchmark and mitigate the cost of grid instability across the industrial facilities. It's a pretty interesting company based in UK and in Sweden. IEM, that's another example of Italian company that specializes in the big data analysis and intelligent energy management for microgrids, renewable plants monitoring, asset management. We've invested in them to also co-develop solutions which are already integrated in our energy manager offering. One of them would be also DEP, Direct Energy Partners. That's the US-based companies that are in microgrid design, also in engineering and procurement platform. We currently define a portfolio to promote the DC microgrid infrastructure that links renewable energy, direct decoupling, solar generation, and wind generation to produce, store, and to consume energy. So plenty of great startups for us to inspire and do business together with.
And it's great to see how much you guys are doing in the space, Anton. Full disclosure for all of our listeners, Smart Society Ventures and ABB are both investors in Protexo. So that's how Anton and I got to know each other and got to spend a bit of time serving on a board together. But one of the things that we do see across the climate tech space overall is corporates like ABB playing pretty large roles in early stage companies. So it's very interesting to see you guys doing that as well. Maybe on that point, both Switzerland and Sweden are recognized for their strong commitments to education and to research. Has ABB benefited from local partnerships with research institutions and universities and maybe just the broader ecosystems in these regions to drive innovations in decarbonization, digitization, inform your investment strategy? Or have you guys approached this from a more global perspective?
No, absolutely, Bryn. I mean, ABB is working with more than 100 universities across the globe, and of course, in our home grounds in Switzerland and Sweden. Speaking of Switzerland, ETH or ETH, depends how you call it, is one of them. The interesting stories about the robotics. The robotics team formalized the partnership with ETH back in 2014 and collaborated on the topics like automated, independently operating robotics installation systems. And in 2021, the partnership was not only extended to the ABB technology venture, but also invested in the spin-off of the ETH, which is a company called 7 Sense Robotics that provides the AI and 3D visualization. And since then, ABB and 7 Sense worked quite a bit together, and we ended up acquiring the company in the end of 2023, which is a great complementary offering for our AMR, the autonomous mobile robots, to really bring the best of both hardware and software to the customers. ABB Technology Center here in Bern has quite a lot of direct relationships with the institutes, also in other parts of Switzerland, in EPFL in Lausanne. Also in Sweden, you've mentioned, we've got the partnership with Chalmers Institute of Technology and Royal Institute of Technology from Sweden, where we've got currently around 30 students, 20 professors, and more than 70 PhDs who are driving innovation across topics such as connected systems, sensing, software and control. So absolutely, yes, plenty of interaction with universities, but of course not only in these two countries where ABB is from, but also around the globe. But huge value coming from there.
Anton, you've already sort of mentioned about the key role digital platforms are playing in ABB's future growth and competitiveness. What do you think are some of the biggest technological and indeed ethical challenges that you anticipate around future AI-driven energy solutions, and how is ABB sort of looking at the future through that lens?
Absolutely. I mean, for this, I had to ask and consult our AI council that we run as the group. It's driven by our robotics and discrete automation business area. So I just dropped this question and say, hey guys, I mean, what are the technological and ethical challenges that are you facing on the AI in the energy and automation space? So what they came up with, like a few of them. And on the technology side, they mentioned data integration and management. So for sure, integrating vast amounts of data from different energy systems, ensuring the data quality and consistency across the various sources. The second one, you probably wouldn't be surprised, is cybersecurity risks, for sure, protecting AI systems and energy infrastructure from sophisticated cyber attacks, implementing robust authentication and encryption mechanisms, developing AI-powered threat detection and response systems. The third on the technology was interoperability. They created interfaces for the AI systems to work with legacy infrastructure, especially in energy space. Not all infrastructure there it's brand new. So for sure, backward compatibility is important, and for sure developing standards for communication between different AI and energy systems. And the last technological one was the AI model accuracy and reliability. So developing AI models that can handle the complexities of energy systems and ensuring that AI predictions are accurate across various scenarios. They also came up with 3 ethical challenges. Again, probably not something that is unique, but very important in our sector. First being data privacy, of course, protecting personal corporate data used in energy optimization, implementing strong anonymization techniques for energy consumption data, and developing clear policies on data collection and usage. Of course, accountability and governance, clear lines of responsibility for AI-driven decisions in energy systems. And the last is the biases in the AI models, identifying and mitigating biases in training data and AI algorithms, and ensuring fair energy distribution across different regions and demographics. And of course, our AI Council can tell you much more about each of these challenges, but I guess that's the one they are working on.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, a discussion of AI seems to be the appropriate bridge to our last question, Anton, which is, as a climate leader here today on the Smart Society Show, what are your prognostications for the future for electrification in the energy markets?
Well, that's a great question, right? I mean, in terms of which mega trends we see and how it's going to evolve. But definitely, when it comes to the global dynamics of the market for ABB, what shapes the agenda is the climate change and decarbonization. I mean, it goes without saying, and we see this trend accelerating. And it's not just nice to have. That's the core of what we do. Also driven by the resource scarcity, energy transition, and the new energy landscape. I think that also leads into the electrification of everything, right? I mean, we look at the electrification of buildings, electrification of transport, mobility, and electric cars, electrification of industry. So that's again, this trend is here to stay. And of course, in ABB, we're here to support the planet and electrifying everything. For sure, it's also about looking at how we manage global demographic changes, geopolitical shift, digital transformation, rise of AI, all the topics we've just discussed. But again, more specifically for us, we believe that where we see a stronger demand would be the energy efficiency topic. For sure, the more prominent requests on energy security and resilience. How do we address the distributed generation, right, and microgrids, grid stability in general as the topic that is more and more prominent. And of course, I mean, there are different specific segments and opportunities that are part of this story, starting from, of course, better energy storage systems. Of course, the data center is a huge trend, which is in the middle of digital, driven by the Gen AI boost, and of course, requiring more energy. So, of course, how we manage the loads that are created by the data centers. Of course, maybe next to it, there would be nuclear, small modular reactors. I mean, maybe that would be the kind of a more long-term future stories that could help us address the energy equation. And the automation side, I would say that's really about, again, resource efficiency and continuation of the topics that, again, have started a few years ago, starting from Industry 4.0, industrial Internet of Things, and modular and scalable automation that would help us to be the most resource efficient and really address the productivity challenges that our world has.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Anton. We're now going to shift over to our Chasing Unicorns segment, and very appropriately, we'll be having a conversation on nuclear with another great Swiss startup here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, colleagues.
Welcome to Chasing Unicorns on the Smart Society Show. Today, we are joined by Franklin Servan-Schreiber, the founder and CEO of Transmutex, a Geneva-based nuclear energy scale-up, and we're incredibly excited to hear about the innovations that Franklin and Transmutex are leading. Thanks for being with us today, Franklin.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
We always like to start off these conversations with a little bit about your journey leading up to the creation of Transmutex. Our listeners like to hear about that startup and that founding journey. So can you share with us a little bit about how you came to create Transmutex and what motivated you to redefine nuclear energy with this groundbreaking technology?
Yes, thank you. After a personal episode that redefined my life and what I should do with the rest of my life, I volunteered to fight for plastic pollution, against plastic pollution of the ocean. And it was a 4-year adventure. It was really amazing, and a rediscovery of the environment issues that I didn't know very much about. It was very clear to me once you're on the ocean that plastic is terrible, but the flip side of climate change is the acidification of the ocean. It's not just the warming temperature, it's the acidification from excess CO2, which kills the coral reefs and also kills planktons. And so the emergency appeared absolute to redefine how we should do energy. And then I turned myself to hydrogen, being the only medium vector of energy that we could trade. And to make hydrogen, it was very clear to me that you need a 24/7 energy, and that's nuclear. And so you look into nuclear. That was 2018. I looked into nuclear very intensely, and then right away, when you look at nuclear, you think there is a problem. Waste, long-lived waste, 300,000 years, toxic. You have to store it. There is no solution. And so I thought, oh, we're gonna trade, CO2 for nuclear waste, and that's not gonna work. And then I was pleasantly surprised. Once you have this idea in your head, I stayed with it for a year before I heard that there had been an experiment at CERN that had destroyed nuclear waste. And so I was very surprised that I hadn't heard about it. I couldn't find it really on Google. It was very hard to get. But I met the scientist, and after a year of ongoing conversation, I got convinced. And we looked for private money, but we looked for government money. But Germany was against nuclear. It was before COVID, before the war in Ukraine. Everything was difficult, and so I volunteered to try to find private money to do this because I thought it was so important to find a way to destroy nuclear waste. It was very obvious already back in 2019 that nuclear was going to be the baseload energy of the world. And therefore, we founded the company on that premise with a few scientists from CERN.
Franklin, thanks so much for joining the podcast. Fascinating story of your journey of how you looked at the natural world and it brought you to nuclear. Obviously, when it comes to the energy transition, it's one of these sort of fairly divisive challenges. People are either pro-nuclear or they're against nuclear. One of the reasons people say they're against nuclear is obviously the nuclear waste issue, as you raised. I wonder, could you explain a bit about your Transmutex's sort of technology and how your approach to nuclear waste management addresses some of those environmental and societal concerns that people traditionally bring up? And what do you think this could mean for public perception of nuclear as a green energy source for the future?
Well, Chris, first of all, I would like to say, of course, I'm pro-nuclear because I think it's an important technology, but I don't come from the nuclear industry. I have no link with the nuclear industry. It was a very personal journey. I think we need everything on the table. But I have to recognize we need baseload energy. And now, AI and hydrogen issues are showing that we need baseload energy. So yes, we need to solve for nuclear. We think nuclear is indispensable. But if we are going to produce waste that is 300 years in toxicity, and it seems to me a very difficult choice to make. So I'm very happy to be able to talk about this. The way you destroy nuclear waste, what you call waste, of course, we have to redefine, because a lot of people in the nuclear industry say it's not really waste. It could be useful fuel for the future. But what I define as waste is whatever people are thinking of putting in the ground, which is, the 1%, it's very small. There is 1% of the spent fuel when you take out the fuel from the reactor. 1% is going to be very long-lived waste, which is 300,000 to 1,000,000 years, actually. And the rest is called low active or medium active waste, which is quite easy to store and not so dangerous. Okay. So what we're focusing on is 1%. So people say, yes, it's very small, but it turns out it's very potent and it's very warm. Okay. So it creates a lot of problem even when you put it down. It happens that what they showed at CERN is when you use non-water. So you have to take the water away from the reactor. And if you use heavy metal, then you are able to have neutron with the right energy that it interacts with the nucleus of the waste in a way that's very effective in destroying it. So it's similar to resonance. When you are in high school, maybe you remember seeing that movie of that bridge that was in the wind and that would twist with the wind and that got destroys itself. Okay. And so this is what you call mechanical resonance. When you enter into the right frequency and it's like it becomes catastrophic. Well, you have the same for nucleus of nuclear of waste. And when the neutron is exactly the right energy and it hits the nucleus, then it basically split it in two, and you have two smaller nucleus that are much less long-lasting. So that is the way we're doing it. So we are using lead. It's called liquid lead for the coolant. Liquid lead is actually a very smart idea. If your listeners are probably engineers or interested, so the idea is when you have a neutron traveling into liquid lead, it bounces off the nucleus of the lead, which are very big atoms, and it's basically like a billiard ball hitting a bowling ball. And so when the ball rebounds, it doesn't lose energy. Okay, so then you are able to maximize the potential for the neutron to interact with the nucleus of the waste at the right energy. And then why we're in Geneva is because to be extremely safe and to make sure we have the neutrons at the right energy from the beginning, we are using a particle accelerator that pumps protons at 80% of the speed of light into the reactor, and it creates neutrons, very high energy photons. Basically, they interact with a target, what you call a target. Neutrons will come out of that target, and they will come out at very high energy. They will interact with the fuel that is around that target, and that's how you destroy nuclear waste. That's why we're in Geneva. It's because the key part is the particle accelerator.
And Franklin, I know that in our discussions, there's a derivative from the destruction of the nuclear waste in your process that allows for the creation of nuclear energy, then a bit of a circular process. Curious to hear a little bit about that, and also in that context, sort of your thoughts on the recent surge in demand for nuclear power. We've all been reading about the likes of Amazon, Microsoft, and Google looking to invest in nuclear power. And I was saying earlier in our What's News segment that very rarely do I go a few days without one of our potential investors or someone else in the ecosystem asking for our thoughts on nuclear energy. It does really seem to be booming. So can you share how Transmutex is also participating in the energy creation side of this, and then your thoughts on the broader nuclear energy market?
Yes, thank you, Ryan. This is a very important question. The key lesson I learned from fighting plastic pollution is if you cannot find a way to make money from recycling the waste, nobody really is interested. And the people who actually produce the plastic, I learned, were not really interested in the end of life. of the plastic. They are not ready to pay for it. Even though they make money from producing it, they're not willing to spend money from taking care of it. And it's really the same for everything. It's the same for industrial waste, and it's the same for nuclear, except that nuclear is the best managed waste that we've ever had, which is the producer of the energy pays beforehand for the storing, but up to a point. Okay. So my obsession was, how do we make money from recycling the waste? Otherwise, we're not going to make it happen. Okay. And this is the idea, is we make a lot of energy from it. Our system produces 220 megawatt electric, 600 megawatt thermic. So that's enough energy to be profitable, even with the operation of the particle accelerator. And the way we conceive the particle accelerator is to be economically viable, super efficient. We're working with the best laboratories in the world, from Canada to France and Switzerland, and even America. So we are obsessed with how this is going to make money. But so we make money from producing energy by the destruction of the nuclear waste. It turns out that we can produce an isotope of uranium that is the best fissile element that you can find for the thorium fuel cycle. And this is what's interesting, is there are two ways to make nuclear fuel. One is uranium and the other one is thorium. Nobody's really ever heard of thorium, because the fissile element that would be the ideal complement for thorium is uranium-233, which is an isotope that is so unstable it doesn't exist on Earth, but we are able to produce it at scale in our reactor. And then if you mix it with thorium, you can use it in a very traditional, very well-known technology reactor, in particular heavy water reactor, which is the Canadian reactor used in India, used in Romania, very well known. And the efficiency is unbelievable. It's through the roof. Actually, the numbers are confidential because it's just so incredible. So there is a potential that we could absolutely revolutionize the fuel cycle, because we think uranium is going to be an issue. We think there is a long future for uranium, but we need to reinvent energy for the rest of humanity, and nuclear is the California of energy. That's it. That's the energy of the universe. Let's not think there is anything more. So it's either uranium, thorium, or fusion, and that's it. Those are the three choices. And so we shouldn't walk away from thorium. So we make money from destroying the waste. We make energy from it. So we make money. We make money from producing uranium-233 that can make fuel for thorium in a regular water reactor. And then there is the beautiful thing. It's like the shopping network. But wait, there is something else, okay? Is if your waste is less than 1,000 years, then basically you can guarantee the container is going to be waterproof. And so we believe we're going to be able to put it, bury it in many more places than highly specific space that doesn't have water for millions of years, which is very difficult to do. But so we will have a lot more choices, and it should be cheaper to bury the waste. And maybe ultimately we could also use the remaining heat in this waste, which is quite high, for geothermal energy. So here, if we can put this all together, we make money from destroying the waste, we make money from new fuel, from that new fuel, we make more energy, and then in the end, for whatever is left over, since it's less than 1,000 years, we can make money for the next 200, 300, while the waste is still very warm with geothermal energy. So then I believe we can make sure that humanity will take care of this waste forever.
Franklin, you've already mentioned about the role that Switzerland has played in your development of the company. Just wondered if you were able to reflect upon that sort of unique environment that CERN provides you. I know that you've got many former CERN physicists on your committee and uses technologies that have been tested at CERN. Love to get a sort of sense of how that enabled you to sort of set up Transmutex. And obviously, you're seeking to grow I understand you raised 20 million Swiss francs earlier this year to help develop the technology, and congratulations on that. So I was just wondering, with that funding, are there specific advancements or milestones or partnerships that now you're seeking to achieve? Are you seeking to go beyond the borders of the cantons and focus elsewhere globally as well?
Well, thank you. I think it's going to revert back to the rest of the question from Brian, which is about AI. CERN and Geneva is a unique environment. Switzerland, when we created the company, was against nuclear. You couldn't start a new nuclear reactor. So people said, why are you in Switzerland? I said, well, because there is a lot of smart people here, and it's really the mecca of particle accelerators. Not only do we have CERN, where you have probably the highest concentration of super talented physicists anywhere in the world, but we also have the Paul Scherrer Institute, which is the Swiss Federal Research Center, which is actually quite big. It's 2,000 people. CERN is 5,000 people full-time and a lot of users, but PSI, Paul Scherrer Institute, is 2,000 people, so it's not negligible. And they have the most powerful cyclotron in the world. So it's another type of particle accelerator, very efficient, and we have a deep collaboration with them. So for us, being in Switzerland is a unique place on the particle accelerator. But also, it turns out there is a lot of super talented people, especially Italian and Germans. And the Germans have no more jobs in Germany, so they came to Switzerland. The Italians have no nuclear energy, but they have great universities, so they come to Switzerland. And so we are the confluence of all this. So we have 12 nationalities here. So Geneva is fabulous as a small city, for the aggregation of talent that you can find. And it's a unique place. As for the funding, we raised 20 million because we had very strong opportunities, but then things have accelerated. Now we have government level interest in the system, of course. So we are going to look to raise again very soon, because we want to confirm those government level interests, which is where you want to be. You want governments. In the end, nuclear is governments. There is no reactor that you're going to restart without, of course, for safety reasons, but in general, except for the US, most nuclear reactors are under the direct management of the government. And I want to come back to AI and how the fundraising environment is now extremely favorable for nuclear. I was just back, of course, from the West Coast. I was last week on the West Coast. Everybody talks about AI and the need for base load energy, 24/7. I mean, you're not going to have a data center on wind and solar, of course. Maybe I don't know how that plays, but every data center has a diesel generator to make sure that you have constant energy, for sure. Okay, so nuclear is important for two things. First, it's base load, and second, it's massive. And I had no idea how much the plans for the next level data centers are humongous. It's just beyond imagination what they're going to do. And at the same time, my impression from being in the US is that AI is an existential race. It is not just a service, a software service. This is going to go everywhere in our society, from, of course, helping us to summarize or do drawings or write a letter to whatever, but it's much more than that. I met people who are doing AI for hardware, and of course, not talking about the military. This is an existential race with China, probably. I mean, that's my sense in the US, of who is going to be there first. And I think there are lots of military issues that comes with it, and societal controls. So AI is going to be existential. Therefore, there is no more question now about the need for nuclear. It is from Google, Microsoft, and everybody else, the indispensable base of energy. And now we just need to find the right way to do it.
Well, that probably brings us to a good point for our final question, Franklin, which we always ask the folks who join us on our Chasing Unicorns section. Can you share why you think that Transmutex is the next future climate technology unicorn?
Yes. Well, first of all, energy is an enormous market that benefits from economies of scale. So, you have medicine and then energy. Energy is $6 trillion. It's bigger than anything. And we will scale on this one thing. We are rethinking nuclear from scratch to get away from the waste. You cannot get away from the waste if you stay just with uranium. Uranium will produce great energy, but if we want nuclear for the very long term, very sustainable, we believe you need to go to thorium, and we believe we have the solution to do that at scale. This is the feedback we get from countries around the world, and the technology of the nuclear industry can be adapted to thorium. Of course, it's a huge endeavor because, we need to rethink the supply chain, but we believe the need for energy that is sustainable, clean and sustainable, is so important, so existential, that yes, if we offer an alternative to whatever is current, we will be able to become more than a unicorn, a unicorn of a unicorn.
A
this
decacorn.
Is the biggest thing. Yeah.
All right. Well,
we have to find a new word for it. We have to find a new word for it.
We have, we don't hear this word very much in Europe because we don't have very many of them, but my friends in America like to use the word decacorn, which is 10 billion plus. So I will leave it to you to become the first decacorn, I would believe, in Switzerland in the climate tech space, and probably one of the first decacorns on the continent, Franklin. And we're fully behind you here. So thanks so much for joining us today and sharing the Transmutex story and future ahead. It truly is revolutionary, very exciting. Can't think of a better person to do it. That's Chasing Unicorns, and that's the Smart Society Show for today. Thanks so much to all our listeners for joining us.
Thank you very much.